don't want to think, I didn't try, I didn't say something, I didn't speak up, because people live in fear. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to change. And I think, okay, so I'll have to do it twice as much as just to make up for you.
Hello out there, everyone. Welcome to the Switch for Good podcast. Here we are again, almost to 300 episodes. Today is Legends Day at Switch for Good. Yep. Because as we speak, our huge Starbucks demonstration is going on in downtown Seattle, right around headquarters. And the legendary newspaper, the New York Times, is going to be exposing the blatant greenwashing, the egregious upcharge they place on plant milk. Can you say 800%? And the dietary racism that they continue to perpetuate. All uncovered in a covert operation that Switch for Good led, interviewing informants and former employees of the company. And then, of course, we have the legendary co-host of mine, Alexandra Paul. And to top it off, because you clicked on this episode, you know the absolute top of the legend list herself, Ingrid Newkirk. It's going to be a great show. I'm going to do a quick intro for Ingrid because, many of you know so much about her. But there's a few things I might mention, you might not. And then we're going to jump into a really colorful conversation. So as you know, she's the co-founder and president of People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA. Ingrid Newkirk has been a trailblazer for over 4 decades. Under her leadership, PETA has become the largest animal rights organization in the world with millions of members and supporters. And her tireless advocacy and fearless approach have led to groundbreaking campaigns and significant societal changes, which we're going to talk about today. From undercover investigations and high-profile protests to corporate negotiations and legislative efforts, not to mention those provocative ads we all love. Her work has saved countless lives and elevated the global standard for compassion and humane practices. Ingrid has authored 14 books, been featured by The New Yorker, The Times of London, The Guardian, The Los Angeles Times, the list is endless, and was the subject of HBO's documentary, I Am an Animal. Now, she previously shared her insights and experiences on episode 87 of our show, way back when, where she shared her story as a little girl and the dinner with her family at a restaurant that started it all, when the waiter asked Ingrid if she would like her lobster boiled or broiled. If you want to know the answer, you will have to go back to episode 87, because today we're going to celebrate Ingrid's 75th birthday and explore her legacy, the challenges she's faced, the victories she's achieved, and her vision for the future. So thank you, Ingrid, for coming back.
Oh, my pleasure. And congratulations on 300 episodes.
We're good. Almost there. We're like 290, I think, when this comes out. So I know.
You're cheating. All right.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. So I want to dive right into your bravery. And some critics, some folks argue that PETA campaigns are too extreme and sensationalist. Alexandra and I, not being one of those critics, because we just love the authenticity and the intensity of how you share the truth, because the truth's the truth. A lot of people don't want to see it, but a lot of people who you have shown it to have made outstanding, significant changes for animals because of that. But when people say, it's too much, it's too extreme, too sensationalist, how do you respond to those people who say your methods, some will say, they do more harm than good for the animal rights movement?
Well, I've never known anybody say, I'll buy 2 fur coats because I saw your demonstration, or I'll eat 2 steaks because of that. But yes, some of our demonstrations are upsetting because they do tell the truth. They show the things that those who sell products, I hate to call them products, but bits and pieces of animals, and in fact whole animals sometimes, or use them, exploit them, dominate them, are violent to, will never show you. So yes, it's a bit shocking to realize that that lovely hamburger with Maybe the dancing cow on the label didn't come from anything nice at all. It came from privation and misery. So we showed the truth. But what I would say is what's truly shocking, what's truly extreme, what's horrifying is what actually happens to animals. And that is what we have an obligation to keep saying to people, have a look, act as if you care, because I think you think that you're a kind person, a decent individual. You would teach your children the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So let's act that way. Let's not just say we care. Let's actually care. It's not really hard. So here's what you need to do.
You've been an activist for animals for over 50 years now. Can you, just for our audience who either or might not have recognized what was going on back then in the 70s, or for our younger audience, can you just sort of paint a picture of how people looked at animals, treated them back then, and what a novelty sort of what PETA was doing was?
Oh, Alexandra, it was so different. And I think today, of course, young people don't know about that, but they have other things they need to do to help animals. But yes, when I was growing up, and even when we started PETA, little girls wanted to grow up to have a fur coat. That was the sign you had arrived. You had made something of yourself. You either had married right or you had achieved financial success. Nowadays, I mean, young people scorn fur. It's just nowhere. It's hard to even see it anywhere. Now we're fighting, of course, against the wool industry, the down industry, the feather industry, all these other things, leather, and so on. Back then, if you wanted a veggie burger, you'd have to make it yourself because there was no such thing, no fast food place, no restaurants. Maybe there was some hippie cafe left over from the 60s, a Haight-Ashbury kind of place where you might find something. Maybe, I don't know, but you couldn't get soy milk or oat milk or any of these things in the stores. Animal experimentation, it was taboo for you even to suggest there was anything wrong with it. Who are you, a layperson, to even question a scientist? And if you were a scientist who objected, you needed to be quiet or your peers would trounce you. So things were very, very difficult. Elephants in the circus standing on their heads everywhere. Ringling Brothers, the biggest show. They called themselves the greatest show. We call them the cruelest show on earth. Going from town to town, dragging those poor elephants in boxcars, chaining them up behind the big top, all gone now. So alternatives to dissection were unheard of. Medical schools used animals in poisoning tests, practiced surgery. That's all gone. So many, many things have changed, and there are new battles to fight now.
I remember talking about, I think the last time we definitely started with the beginning, the Silver Springs monkey case, and also something that I didn't know was going on. So I'm sure some of our listeners weren't so sure. The injury inducing experiments that the military did on animals. Is that done? Are they still doing that?
It's not all done. And in fact, there was just a little bit of a slide backwards. We did get most of the things stopped where the military, for example, very early on, we found that the University Services of the Health Sciences, right opposite the campus of NIH in Bethesda, Maryland, was putting pigs and dogs in slings and then shooting them. And then they would bring in medics, people on the battlefield who would treat injuries. And they would treat these wounds and then they would kill the animals. And we said, this is ridiculous. In Sweden, they're showing how the trajectory of gunshot wounds in blocks of gel. We got emergency room surgeons to say, military's welcome to come into my emergency room on a Saturday night in, say, Chicago or New York, and you can have all the wounds not very carefully shot in a particular place, but all over the board with all kinds of weapons. And
like real war.
Real war. We'll show you what you can do. So we got those stopped. We went to the Department of Defense, the Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger's house, and we went to demonstrate on the mall everywhere. And we got members of Congress who were wonderful, who said, this is rubbish. I mean, this is just total rubbish. And so it was stopped. We also found training going on with the Coast Guard, with the Navy, where they would shoot animals in field exercises. And we stopped that. And we also stopped these field exercises in the jungles overseas, where elite forces were training, and part of their training was to kill cobras and suck their blood and do all these other just ridiculous, macho, old-fashioned idea of how to be a hero and a survivalist. And we got that stopped too. They have rations, they can take rations with them. They can eat plants. They can learn from people who know how to survive. But this was just silly. I mean, how are you going to even find one cobra and drink their blood and last for months? So we stopped that.
Why do you think the things that have changed and other things haven't?
Well, I think it's a progress, isn't it? That some things are very obvious, like fur. When you showed people animals with their feet stuck in leg hold traps and steel traps, frantic, and you showed people fur farms, which are factory farms with the animals turning in circles, they were shocked. They had no idea. They thought it was all glamorous. And so that turned their stomachs, their heads, their hearts, and they stopped. And it took a long time for it to stop. But the progress began, the process began, and it stopped. Food, I think availability, convenience are factors. Nowadays, I mean, if anyone says it's hard to be vegan, I just have to laugh because it's so easy, and you can have any taste you want. The taste likes are phenomenal. And you can cook or you can buy, you can have fast food, slow food. It's all there. I was just talking to somebody about Harmony restaurant in Philadelphia that I went to years ago. It was a Chinese restaurant, and that was the first time I knew that one day there was going to be vegan everything, because they had faux sea slug. I thought, oh, God. It's coming.
What a demand there must be for that.
Apparently in China there is, and I thought, okay, fantastic. But now we have, faux gras. We have all these cheeses that are fabulous. They used to taste like dog food. Now they're just phenomenal. They melt. They're tasty. Even Bonnie Bell or whatever it is has that tiny little cheese. It's marvelous. But convenience, to answer your question, Alexander, I think convenience, people are a bit lazy. So being convenient, knowing other people who are doing it also makes you feel part of the tribe. Availability, condemnation, and with things that are harder, you have to have alternatives for most people to go along. I mean, very few people will just say, I'll give up everything I'm used to because I saw cruelty. They might be influenced they might be influenced by health, environment, cruelty, religious things. It's a gamut, really.
And then, of course, the science has gotten better so that there are replacements for animals in testing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the alternative, the choice you can make. And young people coming up in science are extraordinarily good. We have a film, you know about it, called Test Subjects. And it's about how these women, they happen to be women, were coerced in medical school by their professors. Some of them, they all got PhDs now, but they were all told, you must use mice and rats, you must use animals. And one of them is so wonderful. She said she counted how many she had to kill before she could get her degree. And they really told her, you will not get your degree unless you do this. She deeply regrets it. She wanted her degree. She now works for alternatives to animals in experimentation. And at some point, she counted the 200 she had killed as the first 200 she had saved. Have organs on a chip, human organs on a chip. What are we doing fiddling around by force feeding beagles and rats and mice and monkeys and implanting things in their heads for psychology? It's absolutely dark ages rubbish, but it's funded by our federal government.
Yeah. And I've learned from Alexandra that the results rarely transfer to humans.
Oh,
so what are we doing?
95 to 99%. 95 to 99% of drugs tested on animals do not do what they do in other species, what they do in our species, because of metabolic differences. Physical ability to take those drugs and do something with them. We're physically, metabolically very, very different. So the way we process drugs from a mouse to a rat there is a difference. So you can imagine from a beagle to a child, it's absurd. So yes, and then of course what we're talking about is drugs. With cosmetics, I mean, it's silly. You can take corneas from an eye bank, they're human corneas, and test something, a substance, a household product, mascara, shampoo on that, and you get a human result, not in a rabbit's eye, which has 17 different components to a human eye. And then we have psychology. I mean, what are we doing taking baby monkeys away from their loving mothers and experimenting on them with fright experiments, showing them rubber snakes and plastic spiders and locking them in boxes and frightening them with noises, so that for 40 years in one case, 30 years in another case, we can just write down their reaction, kill them, and look at what has happened to their brains from fright. How is this allowed? How is this exempt? People have to rise up and tell the government that and it is the government, it is NIH, that we will not fund this muck.
And then there's the depression studies that you've talked about that try and measure depression in animals and then gauge God knows what. Ingrid, tell people about those.
Alexandra, that, of course, is the forced swim test. Now, if you want to hear something really absurd, I mean, it's so cruel, but little animals, and of course there is much either disgust at little animals in the experimentation community. They're cheap, they're easy to handle. People will not be so sympathetic, so they're used by the millions and millions. If you want to test an antidepressant, pharmaceutical companies, in order to get acceptance by the federal government, will often put a small mouse or guinea pig in a beaker of water with solid sides. And of course, they think they're going to drown. And they swim frantically. They try to go up the sides. There's no way out. They dive to the bottom and scrape at the bottom. There's no way out. And they frantically keep swimming and swimming and swimming. Some have been given an antidepressant for humans, which may not work on them at all. And some of them have not. And the experimenters simply record at what point this little animal gives up and stops swimming and decides it's hopeless, I'm exhausted, I'm going to drown, there's no way out. It's so perverted. And we've stopped it at various universities. We still have campaigns on our website of other places that need to stop it. And we need the government to come out and say, this is not acceptable. It's garbage. And a lot of what we see is total garbage, throwing billions at it, but garbage.
And some of it, most of it, really all of it, the scientists aren't actually learning something that's applicable in humans, like you mentioned. And then tests like trying to see if a bunny or something is going to be, or a monkey is going to be scared of a spider. Like, what are you learning about your human children? Nothing. They're scared of a spider. It's nothing medical that you're helping them with.
Yeah, you see over and over again, you almost can't believe what you're reading. It's such garbage. And they do things with songbirds, which is extremely sad. They capture wild birds, and birds are frightened if they're handled by human beings. We've got this woman in Louisiana, her name is Latin, and she goes out and captures songbirds, which she's actually done illegally in some cases. And she will put electrodes in their heads. She will deprive them of things. She will take away their ability to sing, and she and other people. And you think, for what are you learning? What they often say over and over again are two things. At the beginning, they say, we may be able to learn something about human behavior, or we may be able to translate this into something useful for humans. Gibberish. And at the very end, invariably, you will read over and over again the words, this did not seem to bring any conclusions. This study is inconclusive. Various versions of inconclusive. And you think, you should have thought of that at the beginning, not after you've tortured and killed all these animals and spent all this money and wasted all this time. People need medical help. Cost of insurance is so high, and all we're doing is churning out more and more drugs, which have all these side effects you read about on television, including anaphylactic shock and death. I mean, what are we doing with diet? What are we doing with medicines? And what are we doing with throwing our money into animal experiments that are nothing that should exist in 2024?
And they've held back science because we've been relying on these for so long that we have a lot of bad science, and we haven't moved forward with the alternatives, although there are alternatives that should be used, but the government hasn't put enough money into those. And it's just been a huge brainwashing of society, because people felt guilty, like, oh, if I am against animal experiments, that means I don't like my son or my daughter who might have an illness.
Yeah, it's one of the things, of course, we have the government and we have industry. And sometimes the industry has to kowtow to the government in order to get the stamp of approval on its product, whatever it's selling. And that's very particularly true with drugs. They're sort of stuck in this cycle of circa 1920 approval mechanisms where nobody knew what to do. And they thought, well, force feed it to animals, do something with animals, and then, you can reach some value and you can then approve it. It doesn't mean that it's saved the animals. It doesn't mean it's applicable to humans, but you've done the test. Okay, fine. The other thing is we have this old boy network that is not interested in innovation at the NIH, at the NIMH, the mental health as well as the health. And it funds the same old thing year after year after year. The old boys just pat each other on the back. It's a closed system. If I approve your experiment, you'll approve mine. And we both grew up doing animal experiments. We don't know anything about technology. We don't know anything about modernity. We don't know anything about these other things. So NIH just carries on down the same old trail. And it's industry that's coming up. PETA funds alternatives. We've got a lung machine. Instead of sticking monkeys and rats into plexiglass tubes and forcing them to inhale noxious gases, we have a lung machine that tells you the results really quickly, doesn't involve any animals, and gives you relevant information. If we can do it, you'd think the federal government could do it.
It's predatory behavior, mostly by sociopaths. I mean, if they can sit there and watch this horrific scale of suffering, that's void of having any sort of empathy. I mean, it's just like it's only their left brain that works or something. It's almost like it draws those types in.
It does, Dotsie. And I think you've made a very good point because, we go to slaughterhouses, and sometimes there are so many people in slaughterhouses who have no options. They're migrant workers. They can make dirt. They can't find any other job. They're often paid under the table. Their living and working conditions are vile. And these poor people, that's one set. But the others, we find people in slaughterhouses dropping cinder blocks on pigs' heads, spray painting their faces, punching them in the face, having sex with them, all these kinds of things, or their carcasses, all these kinds of things, because those are the type of people, the other set, that's drawn to it. And I know that in laboratories, the people who are doing psychological torture experiments year after year on a monkey stuck in a metal box barely bigger than their own body, with nothing to see, nothing to do, nothing natural, nobody to do anything kind to them whatsoever, living in fear and being tortured, there has to be a mindset that's the same as those sadistic slaughterhouse, what they found a niche where they can carry on legitimately doing hideous things to those they have power over. And yes, they should be ferreted out. They should be exorcised from these labs. And we're paying for them. So Congress needs to hear from everybody. There's the Cargo Act. There are all these things now. The push is on to stop more laboratories from being built and to modernize all this stuff. And I wouldn't say modernize medicine, because a lot of it has nothing to do with medicine, nothing at all. It's just sick stuff.
Yeah. It begs the question, how will all of it ever stop? Because we have the same problem with predatory behavior with children and women and old women. And how those folks continue to replicate.
If society can condemn it, and what Ingrid has done in her activism over the years is open the eyes of people so that we've started to condemn those things, and it doesn't justify the scientific knowledge anymore. Right, Ingrid? We've sort of...
it takes a long time. I mean, just as you would imagine, you show someone how a fur coat is made and they would immediately stop. But it took a long time to get enough people, the 100th monkey, to change their behavior. And it's the same with this. You must chip away. You must work at it. And we do have good impetus now. What you say about women and children, yes, but it's condemned now by society. And God help anybody who's caught, with kiddie porn.
Right, but it's also going all day, every minute. I mean, that's what it's like. Yeah.
Yeah, bad humans. Bad humans you'll never eradicate.
Yeah.
I mean, they're born without any empathy.
Right.
They're being sadistic. But having the government endorse something, which it used to with enslavement, with women, with children, it used to be okay, child labor, all that. But it's gone now because of the pressure of society. One day, and I don't think it's that long in the future, that far in the future, if we keep agitating, is we're already stopping labs being constructed in Texas, in Georgia, these massive monkey prisons, 43,000 primates they want to bring in from overseas to Texas, 30,000 primates to breed in Georgia. And we've told the community, here's what they'll do with them. Here's what will happen with their runoff waste. Here are the dangers of disease in your community. Here is how they are shipped. And the community is saying, we don't want that. So I think the more you wake people up and keep showing the facts, and the fact that all this money is going into this hideous enterprise that's just an old habit that has nothing to do with helping human beings, and it certainly isn't helping animals, the more we'll get closer to the goal. It will be condemned by society. And our great-grandchildren, at least, will look back and say, what did you do? What was going on? They won't be able to believe it.
Did you know that nearly $500 million is literally thrown in the trash every single year because of a corporate welfare scheme in the National School Lunch Program?
Wow, Dotsie. Well, what's all that taxpayer money wasted on?
You see, K through 12 schools are actually federally mandated to include a cow's milk in every single school lunch. And according to USDA data, about 1/3 of these cartons are thrown away untouched because the kids just don't want them. How's that for government waste?
That's hardly surprising, considering 1/3 of Americans are lactose intolerant, just like me. Now, I know that the WIC program provides non-dairy choices for children under 5, but it seems like the NSLP revokes that parental choice once those children enter 1st grade.
Yes, that's absolutely true, Jason. Moreover, the dairy industry gets to double dip on corporate welfare, from government subsidies on the front end to guaranteed market in schools on the back end.
This government waste is just unacceptable. Well, what's the solution, Dotsie?
The bipartisan AdSoy Act introduces competition finally into the NSLP between dairy and non-dairy milks that are nutritionally equivalent for the kids.
So the AdSoy Act doesn't remove dairy milk. It just gives kids and parents the freedom to choose the right milk for them?
Exactly. See, with the AdSoy Act, we can empower students and parents and cut government waste at the same time.
Let's pass
the
the
AdSoy Act and do right by our kids.
When you first became actually an activist for animals, you volunteered in an animal shelter, and then you got a job as an animal cruelty investigation officer, and then you were a pound master, I think, in Washington, D.C. So you saw a lot about how animal shelters worked. I'm volunteering at my local dog shelter. And I'm wondering, can you talk about what animal shelters were like back then, and how have you been working to change them?
Well, Alexandra, I think it's going in a bad direction, frankly. I mean, when I started, it was really bad. There were gas chambers, explosive decompression chambers that animals were put in to kill them. I won't say euthanize, because euthanasia is a humane process, a painless process, to kill them. And animals were actually bludgeoned to death in North Carolina by prisoners brought into their dog pound. So we've worked very, very hard to get rid of all that stuff. Also, animals were just sold over the counter. I worked at DC Animal Shelter. You could come in, you could be a guard dog company, a junkyard, you could be a fighting ring person, plonk $5 on the counter, and off you go with the dog. No questions asked. So having some standards of, what are you going to do with this dog? Are you allowed this dog in your apartment, or will you have to evict him as soon as he gets there? You know, have you the money for veterinary care, which ain't cheap? You know, all these things. Do you have the love, the patience, the time? That was all instituted. Spaying and neutering, unheard of when I started, unheard of. And then we started the very first clinic in Washington, D.C., got everybody sterilized. PETA has sterilized over 225,000 animals for free or for low cost since we started our own clinic. But these shelters started to say, got to spay and neuter, so as to try and stop more animals who are unwanted coming in. Everything was sort of tidied up, getting much better. Wonderful things were happening. And now we have the no-kill movement, and it sounds great. But to me, it's a total disaster, because what it means is they're bullying shelters into having no euthanasia. And just 5 days ago, on one day, we were given at PETA, at our one shelter in Virginia, 3 separate animals who were in deep trouble and needed to be euthanized, sent to us by 3 different no-kill shelters, because their doors are closed. They are what I call hobby shelters. I'll take in frou-frou dogs. I'll take in dogs with no problems. I will take in adoptable dogs. And when I'm full, I will close the door. And you can bring a pregnant animal and you have no money, you're being evicted, or a dog racked with cancer, and I'm full. I'm a no-kill facility. So what happens to them? If you're lucky, there's PETA down the street, and we will euthanize free of charge for people who don't have any money, who are on a fixed income, who are sick of seeing their dog racked with pain, and they can't afford to go to a vet. But if you don't have us or someone like us down the street, what do? You say no. The people abandon the dog. In Texas, there are some towns where they say it's euthanasia by traffic because the shelters have closed their doors. This is really wretched. And if anyone hears the words no kill, they should say, so what do you do when a sick and injured animal comes to you, a dog who's pregnant? What do you do when you turn them away and they won't get spayed? They'll produce more animals on the street, in the woods, or just abandoned or passed around like a parcel. So I say no, open admission shelters. That's what we need. Decent people. If an animal has to be put down, euthanized, it needs to be in the arms of somebody who cares, with their owner, if possible, standing there to say goodbye and calm them, and they won't feel a thing but not send them out onto the street again, not turn your back, shake your head and say no room at the inn. That is not decent.
No, that really upends the no-kill myth. I mean, wow, yeah, and we do it in our homes with lovingly with our dogs. I mean, take them. We're doing that. We're killing. I mean, I just went through 2 Chihuahuas over the last year. They got to 16, just suffering, and they didn't deserve to suffer anymore.
And Dotsie, I will say this too. I am sick of hearing no kill from people who eat animals.
Right. Right.
Right. Yes, that's
right.
That's, yeah. But no, I have a question about this though. I agree with you, by the way, because I think a life in a cage is so much worse than being euthanized, if you have no place to go. So you probably have some strictures on what you mean. You mean that the euthanasia needs to be like a shot so that they don't feel anything instead of being gassed. And then how do you feel about animals who are quote unquote not able to, unadoptable?
You can't build cages to the moon and back. There are millions of unwanted animals. And yet you go out onto the street and people are buying cockadoodles and Labrapoos or whatever they are that are being specially bred. They're mixed breeds. You can get them at the shelter. At the shelter, you save a life. Go to an open admission or any shelter, I don't care, and adopt one if you have the time, the money, the resources. If you care, adopt 2 so they can keep each other company. Help the situation. But don't sit at home and criticize and then go and buy a Frenchie who can barely breathe. What are you doing? We don't need Crufts. We don't need Westminster. We don't need these dog shows. We don't need breeders. We don't need pet shops churning them out in puppy mills. We have an overpopulation crisis that no amount of cages and kennels could solve, even if you thought that was humane. But, I know that if you bring a dog in to one of these shelters that's no kill, I've been and I've seen them, and a dog who's been there for 3 years and they won't look at you anymore and they're turned at the wall and they've lost all hope. It is just no life. If they are truly unadoptable, then there is no place for them in this cruel world. Let them go away kindly, peacefully. They won't know. A wonderful meal, being loved and stroked and sitting on a couch. And that's what we do with our guest rooms. We have beautiful, comfy things for them. People play with them. And they don't know it's their last time on earth if they have to go. And then they're gone. There's no suffering at all. And there was no place for them in this cruel world because of people buying all these animals and throwing out the ones they didn't want after COVID and breeding more. Look and see who the problem people are. And it's not the people in the open admission shelters who are performing a painful to them, not to the animal, a painful, heartbreaking act to them, where they show their love, the ultimate act of, I'm so sorry, there's nowhere for you. Nobody loves you.
Yeah, no suffering. I have a question for you from our audience. I was up in Winnipeg, Canada, speaking recently, and it was to a mixed crowd of some vegans and some vegetarians and then some omnivores. And one of the ladies came up to me afterwards and she said, I've just started somewhat recently eating plant-based. The question came up that earlier about the difference between plant-based and vegan. And we explain not treating animals as a commodity, that there's no place for animals of any kind, of any sort in what you're wearing or doing or makeup, explain the whole thing. And she said, I didn't realize the difference in that definition. I didn't know. I thought I was vegan, but I have a down coat on. And she said, but it's just their feathers. And we brought up wool before and down coats. The vegans or the plant-based folks that we love very much that listen to this podcast, I mean, you really have to be willing to dig down the rabbit hole of the internet to look and see what happens. Can you share with us why wool and down are just not okay?
Sure. And I mean, she said it. She said, well, it's just their feathers. They're not our feathers. They were
Not
born.
your, right.
They're theirs. You know,
the stuff that coat with your hair or your hair. I don't know. That's not even painful. Yeah.
It's their skin. It's their skin. You have to steal it. You have to kill them to get it. And I say to vegetarians, you know, do you think the dairy cow, for example, goes to a lovely retirement home? No. If you buy dairy, you're killing the calf, killing the cow, and they go down the slaughter ramp when they're in the least physical health to do so. So no. But yes, with hair, with wool, and I'll tell you a little bit about wool in a sec, but it's part of the meat industry. All those animals are eaten. What you have when you also sell their hide and their feathers and so on is you bolster the meat industry. It's making more money. The profit margin is greater. If you said you couldn't sell the leather, the feathers, the wool, and so on, that market would plummet because the cost of the meat alone. If you go, India, believe it or not, exports more beef than almost any country in the world because they don't eat it there. But the cost of the hide, the skin, the leather that goes into shoes and belts and bags is more than the cost of the flesh. So, you know, you can't do that. Wool.
Yeah. So let's stick on I want to stick with the feathers and the wool because people understand that someone's skin, they had to die. There's nobody's skin. I mean, but why they're going, I don't know. Why are the sheep are dead? Why are they dead? Don't they just shave them?
Yeah, I hear people say it's just a haircut. And you think, oh, you poor naive person. Oh, please let me show you the videos. We have been on every continent except Antarctica in the shearing sheds. Try to say that quickly. And what we have found in every shearing shed, and I've been to ones in Australia, is that where most of the wool comes from, is that the men, and this is true, they are often on amphetamines because they are paid by the number of sheep they do. So they have to work very, very quickly. Do you think they are gentle? Do you think they go, oh, it's all right, come here. I know you're a prey animal and holding you down is frightening, but I'm going to be gentle. No. They've got metal clippers. They smash the sheep to the ground. They turn them upside down. They go through with the clippers. They take off a teat, a part of an ear. They take off other things. And I've seen these sheep come out, and a lot of them on these fast, big factory shearers are cut to shreds, and they stand there and they just shiver because they are so frightened and they've just been through a near-death experience in their minds, and they have wounds. If the shearer, which they very often do, make a big wound, they stitch it up with no painkiller, just a big old blunt needle, and stitch it all up, and then kick the sheep down the chute into the field. And that shearing is only one of the atrocities that most sheep endure. In Australia, they're put through the sheep dip, all their head goes in, they're separated from their family, they're out in drought fields, they are shipped through all sorts of things overseas. They're shipped to Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, all these places on ships. They're petrified. You imagine what that must be like. And when they get to the other side, they have their throats slit. But there aren't retirement homes for those wool sheep. That's all meat. That's all meat. So you're just helping prop up the meat industry. And they're so gentle. They're so wonderful. Such personalities these angel lambs have. These wonderful rams who are so protective of their wives and their children and so clever.
And they're also, aren't they bred to have an enormous amount of wool, which can get super hot and uncomfortable? And so we justify by saying, well, we shear them, but they don't need to be that way. And they also get a lot of infections because of that around their anus, I think, where maggots will, and to solve that, instead of actually tending to it, they'll just cut that skin right off without anesthesia. I mean, the way they're treated. And you mentioned the shipping. The shipping is horrendous, the amount of animals who die because they're packed in and it's so hot and they're not fed or watered. And it's just horrendous.
Yeah, they'll throw them overboard. If they see one that's sick or ailing or down, they just chuck them overboard. They're alive. And they're in the middle of the ocean somewhere on their way to the Middle East. That's Australia. And we're mentioning Australia, of course, because that is where the bulk of wool comes from. They may ship it then to China to be made into something or to Italy to be made into something, but the bulk is coming from Australia. And what you're talking about, I believe, is, yes, what happened was that people in Australia who are going to farm sheep bought sheep over from Spain. They're merinos, and they have all this extra wool, just folds of wool. And that's where the maggots get in. And so to stop maggot infestation, they do cut off the skin on their rumps, and then they put tar or creosote or something on those wounds. And you see those lambs, because they want scar tissue, because they want the feces to fall down and the maggots not to gather. And you see those lambs crawl sideways like little crabs across the field for 3 or 4 days because they're in such pain they can't stand up. So yes, they got the wrong kind of breed, but they're greedy, so they want more wool. So they want wool with folds that really the climate cannot sustain. So it's all greed, all greed. We're not survivalists, are we, Dotsie? I mean, Alexandra, we don't live in caves anymore. Why would we possibly think that we want to wear animals' clothing?
Right. Their skin, their fur, their wool, their feathers. They're not ours. We have our own stuff.
You asked me about feathers, and just very briefly, I mean, we went to South Africa where most of the ostrich feathers come from. And these lovely, curious, wonderful ostrich, young ostriches who look at everything and they just want to know what's going on. And they'll stick a bag over their head and they'll throw them on the truck and they'll bring them to the factory. And we went inside and we watched them, one ostrich, looking to see what's happening to the other ostrich. And in comes the ostrich and they turn them upside down, stun them or try to, and put them through, cut their throats. And then they pluck the feathers out. And those feathers are going into these boas that you see that some rock stars are wearing and fashion, and we're complaining about that. And the others, of course, come from live plucked geese and ducks, the way they live pluck rabbits for Angora. We don't need any of this. We're not survivalists. We've got fabric, we've got fibers, we've got fabulous things. This is silliness as well as being totally cruel.
Yeah. After so many decades of seeing animals in these terrible circumstances, all caused by humans, it must become dispiriting at times. And I'm only 6 years into Switch for Good, and I cried for the first 2 years straight. I'm not kidding. Alexandra was witnessed as we would meet at the podcast. I mean, how do you avoid burnout?
I don't think there's an option for me for burnout. I don't quite understand it. I'm totally depressed by some of the things I see. I cry a lot. I think I cry more now, maybe, than I ever did, because I've seen much more. And I can now, it's so ridiculous. I'll see a happy dog going down the street with his tail wagging. And it almost makes me cry because I think, look, there's the exception. You have no idea what we're seeing on the other side of things. And so it's very hard, but I have coping mechanisms and I'm very careful that I don't dwell on what I can't fix. I only concentrate on doing this, and this, because I have a chance of fixing those things, chance of waking people up, a chance of, at least in my life, not looking back with regret. I mean, maybe I will look back with some regrets, like Frank Sinatra, always regret something. But I don't want to think I didn't try, I didn't say something, I didn't speak up, because people live in fear. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to change. And I think, okay, so I'll have to do it twice as much as just to make up for you. But yeah, we're not a prize species. We may be very clever. We may be able to send a rocket to Mars. We may be able to make an iPhone, but we are not evolved ethically enough that I would expect that everybody would simply get the facts and switch. I am a realist, head in clouds, feet on ground, is I know I'm surrounded with people who, like me, needed to hear over and over again, this is wrong, catch this, here's an option, and so on. So all I can do is just keep going.
I think about that all the time where I go, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. And then you instantly go to, oh, and then what? Not fighting. And I go, I can't not fight. So here we go. Get up out of bed. Let's do it again. And it's like that. It's like the alternative is just not an option.
And if you do something, once you've done it, you think, that's great, I did it. You know, it's almost like people say, I've decided I'm going to run, and they haven't run. And then they think, oh, it's so painful when you begin running. At the end of it, people say, I did it. I maybe tired, but I did it. If you think, I have the option to speak up here and say something or not, once you've done it, no one's, what are they going to do to you? You've said something, you've been honest, you've shared something. They may or may not change, but you've done it. That feels better than being a coward and being a go-along. You've done it.
I found that a lot of times when I speak up, like there's a hardware store that has these little fish in little containers. And so I wrote to them, and then I had a meeting, and they were totally like, yeah, we want to get rid of this. We're going to get rid of this. And so they didn't like it themselves. They just needed a little nudge. You know, sometimes they're not, most people understand when they see what Ingrid has and PETA has shown them, they agree, but then they have other reasons that, you know, that might cloud them. But what are some of the companies or situations that you want people to know about now that you're working on? Because PETA's ahead of the curve, just like fur. I mean, fur is dead because of you. One of the reasons, the huge reasons, is because of your ad campaign. I'd rather go naked than wear fur. And that was huge. And so I know you have campaigns now that people might not know about. So I signed a whole bunch of letters, and I'm like, really? Coconut milk is using monkeys to harvest coconut. You know, that was something I did not know about. So tell us about some campaigns you think people should really watch out for, and companies they should boycott or write to.
Oh boy, have you opened the floodgates, Alexandra. Well, first let me say, don't just listen to me, but go and pick what you want to do on PETA.org, because we make it really easy for an action. You can just press a Y for yes, send something in my name. The Cargo Act, which would stop overseas funding of these laboratories, where we just closed one in Colombia. All these little marmoset monkeys sitting in their own filth, like just garbage. We just closed it, took all the monkeys away. Get the government to stop funding these places. Tell your representative. Whole Foods, not listening. The coconut thing, we've been in Thailand, and nobody should buy any coconut milk or coconut products from Thailand, because many of the coconut milk companies send monkeys, and they train them very sadly. They send monkeys up the tree to pick the coconuts. The rest of the time, the monkeys, sometimes with their teeth taken out, are chained to a tree, chained to a rock, out in the weather, out in the rain, and they are trained with force, with violence, to go and pick those coconuts. So no Thai coconut milk. Whole Foods, wake up, stop it.
Wait, so is there a specific brand we should know about, or does it say made in Thailand?
Anything from Thailand.
Okay.
No Thai coconut milk. Indonesia, India, all these places, they do not use monkey labor. Only Thailand uses slave monkeys.
And you're saying Whole Foods, the grocery store, needs to wake up because they're selling this from Thai. Yeah,
and we've been outside. I mean, you talk about our demonstrations being colorful. We've been outside Whole Foods smashing coconuts that didn't come from Thailand on the ground outside, chaining ourselves to the checkout counters, we've written, of course, umpteen times to the CEO, not budging because they just care about money. So show them. And, I say to people, put the coconut milk in a shopping cart and abandon the shopping cart somewhere in the store. Let them have to reshelve it. HLM or HMLV, I can never get that right.
Like the clothing store?
Yes.
Yeah, something like HLM.
What?
Right,
H&M?
Thank you.
H&M,
Yeah.
yes, and
H&M.
Louis
Good job.
Vuitton.
Okay.
Louis Vuitton is a sponsor of the Olympics, as you know, and we've been protesting them because of exotic skins. We have videotape of them blowing the boa constrictors and pythons up with a water hose put up inside them to stretch their skins to make handbags. We have them decapitating and conking on the head with a hammer.
Why do they have to do that while they're alive?
I think they're just sloppy. It's quick. I mean, they'll string them up. Crocodiles. I mean, people often don't care about crocodiles, but one of the things that they will do is, and this is Hermes, H&M, whatever, Louis Vuitton, is that the crocodiles, they stick a metal rod while they're still alive down their spines to kill them. You can just imagine what that must be like. And these are bags that sell for $3,000, $35,000 a piece. And people think, well, I'm filthy rich. I say you're just filthy. Have a look and see the filth that these crocodiles are. How can you possibly take this filthy, stinking pit-bred crocodile, badly killed, make it into a bag, and you're such a sucker, you're going to buy it and think that you look good? Those are all things. There are so many, but mainly, let's stop the forced swim test. We've got companies that you can write to. Let's get to Whole Foods. Let's stop coconut milk. Tons of things on the web. Stopping dissection in schools. Great bill in California now is going to make it optional for all students, and they must be advised. Don't have to cut the cat's eye. Don't have to cut the frog. I mean, why would you? You're going to become a frog doctor? No, let's get. So lots and lots of things to do. Bullfighting, let me just mention that. Who believes in this country that fighting bulls, sticking them with, stabbing them in the shoulders, well, if you did it to a dog in a ring, you would be hung up. But the Roman Catholic Church, if anyone's listening, if you belong to the Roman Catholic Church, you have a wonderful role to play. Lots of people in the Catholic Church obviously hate cruelty to animals. But in Spain, in various countries, priests are going and blessing the bull ring. They are holding mass in the bull ring. They are supporting the bullfights. And we have priests who are against that. But please tell the Pope, and we've got it on our website, no, this is sacrilege. This is not anything the church says it believes in. It must disassociate itself from bullfights so bullfights can end. And one more thing, if I may, is the blood bank in Indiana. We closed one in California, passed a law, but dogs and cats by the hundreds are being confined in a blood bank in California. Some of them have been very ill. They're living on cement. They're there until they die for years and years. They take their blood every 3 weeks, which is absolutely wrong. And we need to close it down. So you will find out who to write to close the Indiana blood bank down.
What are they using it?
They use it for transfusions. If your dog or cat needs a transfusion, your vet will buy blood.
Oh my God.
The thing is that your vet can buy blood from a donor group, because there are wonderful people who love their, say, greyhounds. They've adopted a greyhound with big veins, and the greyhound comes in and they painlessly take blood once every couple of months or more, and they give them a treat and they make a big fuss of them and they go home. So they're in there and out. That donor blood, but not these confinement places for long-term. And in this Indiana one, some of the staff were getting the cats from Free to Good Home ads, and that's where they ended up, having their blood taken every 3 weeks, stuck in a pen. inside in a warehouse.
Where is this California blood bank?
Well, it isn't any. It's they're not allowed anymore.
Oh.
We hemopet, and we got the people who bought from them to see what was going on, and they decided not to buy from them anymore. And we got a law, and so now it's only donated blood. They have wonderful big donation groups that help with blood transfusions.
Oh, great. Congratulations on that. Thank you so much. So people can go to the website, PETA.org, to find all the different campaigns, ones that they're interested in, so much, what's going on in their area.
And free materials of any kind for a child who might have to dissect, free vegan starter kits, lots of videos that you can show to anybody, and get them to understand what's going on and bring them along, because it's not enough to be vegan ourselves. And to go back to you, Dotsie, what you said, plant-based means that you eat mostly plant-based foods. Vegan means that you don't steal or kill animals for your own purposes, for your own enjoyment, entertainment, products that you buy, what you eat, what you wear.
Thank you. I could seriously go on for another hour, but something tells me you have something else to do today.
Like saving the animals.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for doing this show.
It's a huge pleasure.
Birthday.
And
happy birthday. By the way,
birthday.
folks, if you want ideas on how to spend your birthday, Ingrid spent her birthday handing out information about how pigs are treated, and in defense of course, in defense of animals, she was.
And free vegan hot dogs.
In a pig truck in Chicago.
Right. You can see that on the website.
There's your challenge to everyone.
All right.
Thank you so
Ingrid.
much, Ingrid.
Thank you.
That's awesome.